Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Apologies for the 1 minute past the hour delay there. We are having a couple of technical difficulties with some of the team. So Andrei hopefully will join us, but Martin and I are here, so we're going to get started, and we'll bring Andrei into it when we can and when we can get him back on the line. So, hello everybody, welcome. I'm Scott Hudson. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. Titled COVID Pivot, Your New Business Model. This webinar is part of the OpenTable In It Together series that is bringing together industry experts and thought leaders and the hospitality community. We are excited, very excited today, especially with the announcements yesterday and all hands on deck to have Martin Williams from Gaucho and M Restaurants and also Andrei Lussmann, hopefully who'll be joining us shortly from the Lussmann Group. Thank you both again for joining us. We know time is precious, so it really does mean a lot to us. As I said, my name is Scott Hudson, and I'm one of the directors for OpenTable across the EMEA region. Before we begin, I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping rules. If you do have any questions, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. Please do use it. We'll do our absolute best to get through them during the Q&A at the end of the session. Depending on how long we have left during the dry run, this conversation was very interesting. So we'll do our best to keep some question time at the end. And also, this will be recorded as a webinar. So we won't take offense if you do want to drop off and not be recorded. But the beauty obviously being that this will then be on demand in a couple of days. So let's get started. It's been a very bizarre and crazy time for us all. Since the 20th of March, obviously, when the government announced closures of all hospitality businesses across the country, restaurants and pubs have had to face a multitude of challenges. Since the closures, us here at OpenTable, we've been helping restaurants in any way we can, introducing new business practices, introducing delivery, takeaway options, even pivoting our technology to helping grocery and bars and wineries. Our guests today, Martin Williams from M Restaurants and Gaucho and Andrei Lussmann from the Lussmann Group, have pivoted their business models, and they're obviously here with us today to talk about some of those experiences and insights. Additionally, we will look to a little bit of what the post-COVID future looks like as well. So, without further ado, and you've heard enough of me for a moment, I'd like to hand it over to Martin just to introduce himself and introduce his company and what that was like before the COVID situation hit.
Hi, Scott. Hi, everyone. So, as Scott says, I'm CEO of two brands, Gaucho and M Restaurants. We have 19 venues in total, 15 in London, 4 outside of London, with 2 different brands. Gaucho was the first upmarket steak restaurant in the UK and continues to lead that market. M is a, how would you describe it? It's like a gastro playground of delights, internationally inspired. 2 restaurants, members lounge, cocktail bars, wine store, all under one roof. And we have 3 of those venues, one in Victoria, one in Threadneedle Street, one in a baby version in Twickenham. We have 750 staff, so we're at the sort of medium to high range of fortunate that we're institutionally backed. And prior to lockdown, both brands were enjoying good growth. Gaucho particularly had a fantastic year in 19 and good start to 20, and was in double-digit growth, particularly cover growth, and M had a very good February, and the first couple of weeks of March were particularly strong as well.
Fantastic. All right, and Andrei, welcome. I can see that we've fixed some of those technical difficulties. Pleasure to have you. If I could put the same question to you, and you could just explain about your business before COVID hit, that'd be fantastic.
Morning, Scott. Morning, Martin. Apologies for the technical hitch. Well, Lussmanns has been around for 20 years, and though it's not doesn't have institution backing, is a strong regional brand with now 6 restaurants. Lussmanns has always seen itself as being I think, a personality and sustainable alternative to what litters the high street in terms of some of the more homogenized high street brands. And in light of that, Lussmanns has 6 restaurants. Each one is very different in terms of personality and style and feel. And I would say sits between Cote and the Ivy Grill in terms of price point. So maybe Brasserie Blanc would be a good example of a strong competitor of ours. The underlying concept is very simple. It's just making sure that we do what the chains do, but better. So, you need to make sure you're accessible, you're convenient, you have charming staff, and your cost price is great, and, you're consistent, which is the most important part of it. But we have lots of personality, and the sustainability bit, which has been an underlying part of our business. We haven't shouted about it very, a lot, but it's been a very big part of the decision-making process in everything that we do. We opened Oxford, I think it was 14 days before lockdown. And as we all know in the industry, opening a restaurant is a very difficult process. And Oxford was our 6th restaurant in a different county, in Jericho, and it was the old Coluccio. So we were obviously riding high, and the investment came from within the business, so we didn't have to go out and borrow any money. Financially, we were a business that was in profit last year, and subsequently, we had no formal debt. And it's interesting that at the moment, we're having to reconsider and review our entire estate and what we're doing, even though we had no debt and we were making a profit. But Lussmanns essentially is a strong regional personality-driven business that's for the locals, and basically those who leave London after eating with Martin can come back to the Shires and enjoy something a little bit different.
Fantastic. And before we get into some of the specifics of how you pivoted and changed, could you maybe explain a little bit how you've personally been dealing with COVID? Because I know it's normally it's 24/7 ahead in the restaurants, and I assume that's been the same. But is there anything that you've personally been doing to try and cope with the last couple of weeks?
I think for me it was an opportunity to really be productive from a work perspective. So you're not focusing on guests as much. You're focusing on the business. It's been an opportunity to sort of get that to-do list out, really analyze every element of the business, and push some projects forward that otherwise you would never find the time to do. Plus, do a bit of soul searching within the business and strategize the new world and the next 2 or 3 years ahead. From a personal perspective, I was so fortunate in, I think my two gifts to myself in the last year were a green egg and a Peloton bike. So I've been platoning away, losing a bit of weight, and refinding my love for cooking and barbecuing.
Fantastic. And Andrei, how about yourself?
Nothing is as positive as that. I mean, I think anyone who hasn't been furloughed, if you have been furloughed, you've had to worry about the mental stress, if not the physical exertions of being at work. But we've been really hard at it. And being a small business, and with 85% of our company furloughed, we've had a very small group of people to work with in order to run the to-go business, which was launched in 30 hours before lockdown. So I'm afraid after opening Oxford and now the last 3 months, I'm knackered. Although saying that, I have been a big supporter of Joe Wicks, so I have done Joe Wicks pretty much every morning with my kids. So that has been probably the only sociable addition or change to my normal life. And of course, we work more from home rather than being in the restaurants drinking our coffee. Yeah.
Great. All right. And staying with you then, Andrei, looking at, the lockdown, obviously, could you explain, how you've managed the lockdown? Did you think originally it was going to be this long? And then obviously, as the length of the lockdown did become clear, what are some of the things that you did to respond?
Like I suggested, or like I said earlier, there'll be a lot of businesses out there which essentially make money, don't have debt, and are now saying to themselves, we're in trouble. And I don't think, it's a bad thing to put your arm in the air and say, we're in trouble, because better that you understand the numbers and recognize that we have issues today and work out, whilst the rent is managed until September on our behalf, what your plans are. regarding moving forward, I realised in that week where we were waiting for, I think the country went into lockdown long before Boris said it's lockdown. It was quite clear to see on the high street and in our restaurants there was no one eating. In that week before lockdown, I made a decision simply because it was clear that there was a long-term problem here. I mean, when I say long-term, anything after 4 weeks is, pretty much long-term these days. So it was clear that we had issues. We had food in the fridges. We had staff that needed their wages paying. Furlough had not come about. We had no idea about furlough. So, within 30 hours on the Tuesday, we closed the restaurant. On the Wednesday, we went to the NHS and said, let's help you. And on the Thursday, I realised we might have to wait for the NHS to answer our call. So let's offer a Lussmanns, to go e-commerce offering online. So it took 30 hours to turn the entire business into an online shop, essentially. And quite clearly, it took off. And, when things take off and we're all involved in something very intensely, you forget about the wider problems. You have motivation to get up in the morning, and you have a desire to get a grip of the challenges, the very new challenges that face doing a to-go business. And to date, I think we've sold 35,000 units of food, over that 14-week period, which demonstrates that there has been demand, albeit we're a very small business, and we did this all out of a dark kitchen and furloughed, as I said, the vast majority of the company. But the few people that stayed with us were able to allow that process to carry on. And of course, as we all know, things carry on to change and morph and evolve every single week. It wasn't a matter of saying, there's an online presence, let's make lots of money. It was far from that.
Yeah, and a very quick pivot by the sound of it. And Martin, the same question to yourself.
So I think the most important thing once we went into lockdown and we kept all of our restaurants open and all of our staff employed up to that, we didn't make any layoffs, was to really engage the staff and keep them engaged, give them a sense of community. We started a full program which included mental health, yoga, offering counseling, offering a full training program for our teams, lots of communication, lots of Q&As, basically keep the team engaged during this period, and it was a huge opportunity for us to do that. We also wanted to give ourselves, myself, the whole company and the team, a sense of purpose and pride. So we started preparing meals for the NHS. So over the last 10 weeks, we've produced 5,000 meals for the NHS and delivered those with the help of Hilda and Operation Nightingale to St. Thomas's and the Nightingale hospitals. And that, as well as being a nice philanthropic gesture, I think, gave everybody a sense of pride and purpose and was very important for us to do. At the same time, we've tried to keep our members and our regulars engaged. So we introduced an IGTV channel. We've been hosting virtual members parties, creating some virtual brands for delivery, offering delivery and collection, particularly with Gaucho, which has been successful. And now, in the last couple of weeks, we've introduced Grab and Go, which has worked very well in our restaurants in Richmond and Hampstead. So basically, taking the two priorities of engaging staff and keeping engagement with our guests so that when we do come out the other side, which thankfully isn't too long, our brands are at the forefront of mind and our staff are highly motivated.
Yeah. And sticking with that theme then, Martin, how did your teams respond, initially? And it sounds like, you put a lot of steps in place there to try and look after their well-being, but what were their initial reactions? Can you maybe comment on that?
I think look, this was a time when restaurants, in a sense, had to choose between people and profit, and we very much chose people. And we kept the restaurants open, we kept the staff employed. The furlough process has been as good as it can be for them. And I think there's a sense, what I've tried to do is basically share, as Andrei was saying, a sense of honesty about the situation. and how severe it is and how important it is that we all come together and tackle this issue together, and it will be an ongoing issue for the next 6 months, and that we all have a part to play in it. And I think that sense of honesty and sharing that with the team, they respect that and understand it, as well as appreciate the efforts that we've gone to keep their jobs secure and to continue to talk them through the process, so that there's no sort of sense of concern of job security, or that's as minimal as possible at this time. And at the same time, to offer them the training and offer them the engagement, they've had an opportunity to develop themselves, both career-wise and personally, throughout this period, which many of our team have embraced, and that's been very well received.
Okay, fantastic. And Andrei, I know, obviously different size businesses, but what was the response from your team initially, and what were maybe some of the things that you did there as a response to that?
Well, we weren't half as impressive in regards to what Martin's done. I mean, it's very impressive to hear Martin speak, and there's obviously lots of ideas there that we can all learn from. I think, like I said before, it was really a matter whether it's 6 restaurants or 1 restaurant, because we are a very small business, albeit we've been around for 20 years. It was a matter of survival. And the small group of staff that we kept to help us through this period were essentially very thankful that they had a job, and B, they're earning some money. But most importantly, I think for those people or those members of staff, they felt as though they were part of something very, very important. And that gave them a sense of direction and motivation, rather than being at home. Because though there are a number of people who have been furloughed and have probably quite enjoyed it, and probably will carry on to enjoy it, and it does create a sense of idleness amongst some, there are many which have been desperate to get back to work, and we just haven't had the opportunity to bring them back. How do they feel about what we were doing? I suppose they felt very positive that we were doing something, and they felt as though they were proud of the fact that we were out there still flying the flying the flag, still connecting with our regulars and our customers, still speaking to them. And in addition to that, all I did was personally connect with all of them through Plan Day and through videos every week as to what we were doing, where we were, what was happening as a business, and that they had my telephone number if they needed any money. Money, I say money as a advance, or if they need any help or support. We certainly didn't have the resources or the ability to do any more than that. But the general consensus I got back from everybody was, we're not part of it physically, but we're part of it as a team, and we really feel positive that you're doing something, and we've got something to come back to.
Yeah, and I think we've all seen how incredibly strong the hospitality industry is as a whole, with how close everyone has pulled together during this difficult time. And obviously, you mentioned there, I think both of you, there was so much changing and so forth, and from one week to the next, we never really knew what was going on. So, Martin, could you maybe talk about some of the challenges that you faced during the planning and execution of these pivots that you were looking to do, and just give us a sense of how you then addressed that, obviously, with an ever-changing landscape as the situation unfolded?
So I think everybody has the same problems. The first was cash flow and managing that, and coming up with various scenarios of reopening and how negative sales will be for the next 6 months, a year. And I think we worked very quickly at that, of running a number of scenarios so that we had comfort in what our requirements were. It's similar to what Andrei was saying. So ultimately we know what we need to do to, one, survive this, and secondly, grow out the other side of it. And I think getting that ticked off as soon as possible has helped us and was a good strategy so that we could focus on reopening. The second thing that we did was basically look at, okay, now we've got that cash flow situation, is we need to deal with landlords, and that's ongoing. And again, that needs to be boxed off and almost put into a separate category, because the danger is that people are still navel gazing and getting caught up in only focusing on that. And I think what we did well was, as a team, was basically box those issues off, and they're still ongoing and they're still very serious, and you shouldn't downplay them too much. But then look at, okay, how do we make the restaurant super safe? What processes are we going to put in place, even without government guidelines? What can we do to give our customers and guests and members a real sense of security, that we've taken safety seriously, and that when the restaurants do open, they're not concerned that this is an unsafe place to drink or dine. And so we did a whole project on that. And then the second thing we did was look at all of our revenue opportunities, short-term and long-term, and make sure that we were maximizing them. So some of those I mentioned earlier, with looking at maximizing delivery, virtual brands, grab and go, etc. We've been looking at how we take inside, outside, and maximizing our outside spaces, and applying for additional space with landlords and councils to try and extend our al fresco elements and also weatherproof them, so that if this does continue, we can look at using those outside spaces for longer into the winter. And then putting together a series of activations in the restaurant, so it's not just a case of reopening the doors, but actually celebrating the fact that restaurants are open. I think over the last few months, guests have really learned to appreciate what they're missing, and are desperate to come back and actually enjoy hospitality, enjoy socializing, enjoy networking, enjoy everything that's amazing about restaurants.
Yeah, agreed. And Andrei, I know you pivoted in a way as well, obviously, and with a reduced team. So from your side, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced about making that pivot and then actually executing on that plan that you decided upon?
Well, I think we work in restaurants, and we're all in restaurants. We're known for being able to be quite enterprising individuals, and we can move quite quickly. And in light of that, it became very, very clear on day one, when this was going on, was we didn't have cash in the bank. We all need to know, like Martin said, we all need to know our cash position. Before you think about anything, however sustainable your business is, if you don't have cash in the bank, you're dead in the water. So it became very, very clear that, did we have any cash in the bank, and how are we going to pay the wages at the end of March? And this was before furlough. And I'm happy to say, when furlough was advised on that evening, I cried, because I hadn't the amount of pent-up emotion that I'm sure myself and everybody I know had built up, not knowing what was going to happen. So at that point, when we realized that furlough was coming, it was a release. But until that moment, you had to ask yourself, how are we going to raise cash, and how are we going to pay for the staff, whether it's through a redundancy or whether it's through keeping them on a reduced contractual basis. Very quickly after furlough was cemented into folklore, it became very clear that I had to focus back, keep the focus on the food to go element. And essentially, that consists of producing, packing, picking, and delivery. And I've always learned that in business, if you don't know 75% of what you're doing, you shouldn't do it. There's a reason why 90% of restaurants close every year. That's because a large proportion of people entertain the idea that what they see when they go to a restaurant is what running a restaurant's all about. Well, they couldn't be further from the truth. And of course, I set up this to-go business being one of those people, because I've never packed, never picked, never delivered, never done click and collect. In fact, I'd a number of times said, I will never work with Deliveroo, and I think delivery is the art of the devil. Restaurants are about eating out and enjoying the art of meeting, greeting, and being in each other's company. So very clearly, we had to learn very, very quickly how to produce, or which we could do, but how to pack, and then how to pick, and then how to deliver and click and collect, and all the manifestations that brings along. Once we'd got that going, albeit the menus had to change all the time, as Martin said, you then had to go back to creditors, because all you need is one creditor, one landlord to trip you up, and the whole thing comes tumbling down. So we introduced immediate line of contact from me to all our creditors, and spoke to them through phone and email, and kept that process going on a very regular basis. Just they knew where we were. And you know what? I think we all in the industry realize that 99.999% of our creditors turned around and said, we're with you, don't worry about it, we'll find a way, we're not after the money yet. Because some of us still owe for February and March invoices, and these are good businesses. And once we had essentially established that we had money in the bank just to pay through the furlough scheme, we then generated some money, which then allowed us then to say, let's start paying everything cash in hand, as opposed to what we would normally do is rely on 30, 60 days credit, so therefore it becomes a cash-based business. And then it's just essentially a form of reviewing, refining, and improving on a regular basis. And I think that regular basis is as regular as on the day, every day. I mean, you have to constantly review what we're doing. And that's taken us really till now, where Boris has advised we're okay with 1 meter plus, and we can open on July the 4th. So that now poses a whole series of different challenges to us all. And the food to go and all the challenges we faced to begin with over the last 14 weeks can now take a second seat. Can now be put to one side. And now we focus on the real business of running restaurants and getting customers to come back and enjoy our restaurants.
Yeah, and I would, second that. From the feedback that we've seen across the world is obviously needing to be able to pivot and change. And I think that's why we've looked to do multiple different pivots and developments across our product. Culminating with a takeout product that we're looking to release in the next few months as well. And as you say, lots of people's perceptions on takeout seems to have changed and shifted, and it'll be interesting to see if that continues or if it's something that people move back away from potentially to concentrate on what their core business is. Now, I know there was a lot of news that came out yesterday, and we would probably need 3 days to go into detail and discuss all the legislation and rule changing around what's happened. But I would love to just get a quick sense, and if I could stick with you, Andrei, on your take on some of the difficulties or the challenges with the way in which maybe the government have announced, some of the information they've announced and when they've announced. And I think you mentioned when we were talking earlier about that furlough and the timing of it. Was that the biggest and the most difficult thing for you in regards to what the government did and when they made announcements?
I think the government have been, this is not a political broadcast, so forgive me, but I think the government have been very good at providing us with very clear sound bites, very impressive statements. But the biggest issue for me has been execution. So, the execution of furlough took quite a while. And I know a number of people that didn't last long enough to get their staff furloughed. The execution of grants took far too long for small businesses. And obviously some businesses, the rates are too high. Some of our restaurants are too high, but the grants didn't come through quick enough. So it was very clunky. The mechanism was very difficult to allow us, which are essentially a cash business, and most businesses rely on cash, to move swiftly and quickly. And again, with regards to the latest, and the insurance, the fact that Boris Johnson stood up on the day of furlough saying, "We've got your back. We'll sort the insurance company out. We're going to be okay." And in 95% of the cases, you're sorted. I still believe that 99% of us in hospitality are still waiting to see whether we're going to get any money back for the very insurance we've been paying into for 20 years. But, that's another matter for another day. Regarding the business of yesterday, we all appreciate 1 meter plus, and it's not perfect for all businesses, but it's better than 2 meters. I suppose the biggest issue is, could we have got some guidance and some guidelines earlier? Because yes, there is interpretation. Yes, the government gives us an element of ambiguity for us to work out how we're going to work on our particular business, which is good. But we clearly have been failed in regards to getting this information out earlier, because it should have been, that's what we want you for 2 meters, and that's what you want for 1 meter. And we should have had that information a long time ago, because, it's pretty tough trying to reopen. And I believe the reopening element, forgive me, will be a lot more difficult than closing. Because closing was staff basically furloughed, you can't come to work, and we've got to get rid of the stock on Mothering Sunday. Oh, there is no Mothering Sunday, so food to go. Whereas now, bringing everyone back in piecemeal, it's going to be very, very difficult. And we should have had more time to work it out with our teams.
Yeah, understood. And I think sentiment that a lot of people would probably agree with. Martin, I did want to move forwards to looking at, how you're going to do marketing about your reopening, and looking to the future. Is there anything that you would like to add on that and some of the challenges that you found, around the ruling that came out before we move to marketing?
No, I mean, I think the 1 meter, as Andrei says, is welcome, and I think that gives operators a fighting chance of how they do operate, and is workable. We're going to stick with 2 meters between tables, even though 1 meter of guests dining at the same table just gives a sense of space and safety, and we're fortunate we have venues that are big enough to do that. The other ruling that came through yesterday was collecting data of all of the diners that are in your restaurants. I don't think that would be too difficult and simply be a sort of fill-out form. In restaurants, I think it'll be very difficult to operate that in bars and pubs, but I understand the rationale behind it. From a government perspective, I think the real thing that we need right now is an intervention against landlords, and that's basically understanding that landlords can't take the whole hit of the last 3 months' rent, the next 3 months' rent, and the 3 months' rent after that. But this will become a 9-month problem for many operators, and smaller operators simply will have a 9-month hangover of rent that they can't fulfill. And deferring isn't enough, and it requires some government intervention beyond what they've done, which was fairly pitiful with the guidelines, to basically say, okay, we appreciate that landlords need some rent, so this is the amount which we suggest that they get. That means that operators have less of a hit, and we will subsidize the middle ground between the two. I mean, if you went to somewhere close to a third for the 9-month period, or possibly a 12-month period, that would be something that everybody could work with. But unless it's an intervention, landlords aren't going to roll over and take that. And I think that's the government. I agree with what Andrei said insofar as the sound bites and lack of detail and follow through. But I do think government have done a largely good job keeping restaurants alive up till this point. But there's no point doing all of that hard work over the last 3 months if they're not going to continue to support the hospitality industry for the next 6 months.
Yeah. That's some really good points made there. And I'd love now for us, and I'm just conscious of time, but I'd love us to move to what you are thinking about. So maybe a couple of kind of quick fire questions before we move into, a couple of the last questions and then the Q&A, because I want to make sure that we've got some time next. I can already see some really interesting questions. So Martin, sticking with you, could you, a two-pronged question, could you talk to us about what you're doing around marketing to reopen? And then could you maybe give us a sense of what you think people are going to respond, or how they're going to respond to, restaurants opening back up and, coming back again?
Sure. So I think it's very much two-pronged for us. In the first case, we're talking about how we've made the restaurants safe, and we're going above and beyond government guidelines in that and making it clear. So we will be marketing that, so that that's a sort of a box which is ticked off, and we'll have those measures that we've taken on our websites, and they'll be continuously updated. But and just very quickly, we're defogging the restaurants, which basically sanitizes not only all the touch surfaces, but the air cons, the extraction systems, gets rid of 99.99% of any bacteria. We have introduced elbow openers and foot openers into the restaurants, so that largely they're non-contact if guests want those. From a service perspective, we've got rid of menus that are leather bound, and we've gone with menus which are more a table setting that's disposable, place setting. And we've introduced service tables between the guests' tables, so that if guests do want a non-contact experience, want to serve themselves, we can deliver the food and wine to that table, and after that point they can serve it themselves. So we've introduced mindful dining as a concept to our venues, which is basically considerate of guests' needs, and then we can go as far as non-contact, so pre-ordering, choose your seat in advance, etc., as an experience, and take it to a much bigger level. Hopefully all of that combined ticks the box and gives guests comfort that the restaurants are very safe, that we're taking the safety of our people and our guests very seriously. And then you can look at marketing the restaurants, and we're doing that in a sense. We've introduced Safe Social Lunch, which is a set menu lunch, which includes a welcome back glass of champagne or cocktail. So it's 2 courses, I think, £24, 3 courses, £30. So that's something which we're marketing proactively. We've reintroduced brunches. We're doing something called Beauty Brunch, which will be partnering with other brands that are more lifestyle brands or retail brands, so that guests, whilst they're enjoying a brunch, can also enjoy the other things in life that they've missed, such as having their nails done, having their hair done, and makeup done, etc. We're reintroducing our hip-hop branches, our film clubs. So we've got a whole series, and we're opening on with M on the 4th of July with an Independence Day dinner. So we've got a whole series of activations that we either had historically or new ones that we've introduced into the restaurants, and we're pushing all of those elements so that it's not just a case of opening the doors and letting people enjoy food and wine and sustenance and a slightly stilted mechanical service, but that it's really pointing out the brands are strong, they're very safe, and you can come and have fun and enjoy hospitality once more.
Fantastic. And Andrei, for you, obviously, the reopening and moving back to more of your traditional business, what are your thoughts around how you're going to market that and what you're going to do?
I think that we've got a wide demographic, but it's fair to say that a large proportion of our customers are slightly older, and I think that a proportion of those customers, until the vaccine comes out, just won't go out to restaurants. And I think, to be honest with you, that if we move that community to one side and wait for them to come back, which is understandable, the rest of society, again, generalizing in my understanding, are quite pragmatic. I think their perception of what is safe is moving by the day. And I think if I was to send out eShot on the 1st of May, 1st of June, 1st of July, people would have done a 360 in regards to their demands and expectations from a restaurant. Yeah. I also feel that reputation is huge. And if you have a reputation that goes back, a strong reputation, obviously, that Martin's business has, and Lussmanns also has over 20 years, I feel that a lot more of what you do will come from the view of the customer taking the view that we believe they'll be okay. I don't think the customers, in regards to Lussmanns, on the whole, will want to have too much focus on the detail. I've already had 3 emails saying, we don't want masks, we don't want 2 meters, we just want to crack on and get on with it. Now, I'm not saying they speak for the people, but our view is we've got to be very clear. We've obviously got to be safe, and I think we've got to be very simple with our approach. So therefore, it can evolve quite quickly, and it means the costs we have to keep to a minimum because we have to get open, and we have to work within the guidelines which have been set out. But I think that if it's very simple, people will essentially believe in you and your brand and trust that you will do what is right. If you ask 100 customers their view of what you're doing, potentially, the vast majority, if they are going to go out, will say we're fine with it. But I don't believe they're going to. You'll have the odd one who might feel that you're not doing enough, and the odd one will say you're doing too much. So essentially, I think the customers will rely on their view of you as a business before COVID and trust whether you understand what you're doing and you're saying the right things. Naturally, if you're not going to be doing 1 meter, if you're not cleaning touch points, and your staff aren't being looked after, maintain that they're safe, then they're going to worry about you as a business. Well, of course, all of us will make sure those 3 things are done. In terms of marketing, again, we've got 21,000 people on our market, on our eShop. That will be, in essence, the key driver. I've already opened the bookings without telling anybody because the eShop hasn't gone out, and we've already getting bookings coming through. So I don't think there'll be a problem to begin with in regards to taking bookings on the fantastic OpenTable. But in essence, the next 3 or 4 weeks, once it dies down and we get to see what's really going on, is I think essential. And the ability for every business to remain nimble and able to move quickly in changing their approach, because you don't want anything which is clunky and too detailed that the staff can't adhere to.
Yeah. Okay, and just to close with with the structured questions that we've got, so that we have enough time for the Q&A at the end. And this has been a fascinating conversation, and I hope for those of you that signed in, you can stick with us for just a little bit longer. Acts of kindness. I think you've both spoken about the extraordinary lengths that you, as restaurant groups, have done to help support your communities and the NHS. I'd love to finish on that type of a note. And Martin, maybe to you first. Acts of kindness and so forth have been so prevalent, and I think really heartwarming over this whole period. Can you talk about some of the things in a bit more detail that you have managed to do, and how do you think the approach that we had and this sense of community will continue as we come out of COVID?
I think you've got what happened historically, and in the last 3 months, it's been a real opportunity for the hospitality industry to demonstrate that hospitality stands for kindness and care and people, and we're a people industry. I think now, from an internal perspective, it's very important that as leaders we're seen in the restaurants, we're talking to our staff, we're talking to our guests, and we're not sitting in an ivory tower managing everything by Zoom whilst our staff are coming to work with a sense of apprehension, and our guests are coming into restaurants with a sense of apprehension. So I think it's just very important that now as leaders we remember that we're a people business and we need to be with our guests and with our teams. Our final act of kindness is we're hosting a NHS appreciation dinner for the frontline workers in September, which basically is just a huge thank you to all frontline workers and the bravery and the efforts and energy that they put into the last few months. And again, I think we're very privileged in hospitality to be able to step out for a second and use our offering as a way to really make a statement of philanthropy, kindness, and social statement. So for us, with Gaucho and M are hosting at M3 Needle Street, end of September, a dinner for 200 NHS workers, socially distanced, of course. But I think my main priority right now would be, okay, we've done a lot virtually, we've done a lot of great planning, let's now execute it. It's a great opportunity with a fresh start to really demonstrate the great thing about restaurants to our guests and the guest recognition and genuine hospitality, but more importantly, demonstrate to our teams who will have come back apprehensive, worried about hours, worried about job security. So to continue the program of engagement that we have in supporting them in mental health and training, but to really just be in the business reassuring them.
Yeah. And Andrei, to you, before we move to the Q&A, the same type of question. How do you think this community spirit is going to extend as we now move, into this kind of new normal and back, hopefully, quite quickly to the old normal?
Yeah, I mean, as Martin said, just keeping it really brief, I think our customers will be very glad to get back. But I think the time will come where we move on from this, and we can't forget that we've got to be top of our game. A little bit like the food to go. I think we had about a week of charity going on when we didn't really know what the hell we were doing. And then you suddenly realize you've got to sort it out, because the customers which support you will support you only so far as you make a couple of mistakes. But we've got to remember that, yes, we will come back. Yes, the customers want to come back. Yes, they love our brand. Yes, our staff are desperate to get back to work. But we've got to remember we can't hide behind the skirt of COVID in relation to not getting it spot on from day one, because it's a tough market out there and there will be less customers. One positive, I suppose, was, amongst many, was I delivered. I've never done deliveries. I was doing 70 a day. There was no one on the streets. That's why. But I was delivering 70 deliveries a day for the first few weeks. And then I decided that better people than me can do it. I spoke to so many customers that didn't know who I was, and I didn't tell them, undercover boss and all that. And everybody was so positive about the fact that we were A, open, B, we were selling food to go for those which were either isolating or those who wanted to treat. And it was a fantastic place to be, because my job is essentially making sure that I fix things, broken staff, broken customers, broken restaurants, and to actually get out and speak to people that actually love what you do, because you generally don't do enough of that, was a very rewarding experience. And in light of that, you know, like Martin said, I think we've all got to get back on the floor, you know, and we've got to accept that there are bubbles, but the key people in the business have to be able to be across more than one bubble. However you manage that is an interesting point. Yeah.
Okay. And thank you very much. It's been fascinating, and personally, I you know, I could continue for hours. And I know we set this about a 45-minute time frame. So just looking through some of the questions, I think there seems to be a common theme with quite a few of the questions around, you know, staffing levels and prioritization of opening up and so forth. So as you both have multiple locations, it'd be great to get your take on that. So sticking with you, Andrei, could you maybe share some advice around how you're thinking about how you're going to prioritize reopening? Is it going to be all of the sites at once? Is it going to be, you know, a few at a time? And then what are you thinking about from a staffing level perspective?
I think that one's got to be careful not to be whipped up into a frenzy as the industry's doing and everyone open on the 4th. I'm not saying we shouldn't, because we'll be opening 2 restaurants on the 4th. I think that we've got to take our time. We've got to know our numbers, and we have the knowledge that our staff are furloughed for June and July with no cost to us. So we have time in July to work out strategically with less stress. I can't underline, I'm more nervous now, more apprehensive now, more anxious now than I was when we were closing the restaurants. Because reopening restaurants is almost as though you're having to reopen and launch a new restaurant all over again. Not quite, but it's not far off. And if you try and do more than 1 or 2, now, I don't know about anybody else. I know that my staff will get will find it very difficult, because physically they're out of shape, you know, mentally they're out of shape. They've lost their mojo to a certain extent. So I would say cautious, slow, work it out. Get the better people back first. I hate to say it, but get the ones who want to come back, which are the freshest, the sharpest, the brightest, and slowly get back into a marching regime. I think anything too quick, albeit however sexy it is, that we can all turn around and say we open on the 4th of July, I fear will be a problem for the business. So I would be a little bit more cautious, a bit more pragmatic, and a bit more safe in considering your staff and management won't be ready for it.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice there. And Martin, for you, obviously, you know, more sites. Could you explain what you're thinking about from a prioritization standpoint with reopening, and then also what you're thinking about, you know, how you're going to manage the capacity?
Yes, I mean, our capacity is by and large reduced by half. Put that to one side. I think the priority in the next week is we've got training plans in progress, which ensure that staff are trained, not only in safety, but retrained in all the products so that they have the right level of passion for those products, retraining in standards so we can hit the ground running. Andrei's absolutely right, but I'm of the overexcited school where I want the restaurants open as quickly as possible and to see them busy again. So we're opening 12 of the 19 restaurants on the 4th or the 6th, depending on whether they're weekend restaurants. The remaining restaurants that we'll keep closed for the time being are ones which simply have got no demand. So predominantly in the city, we have one in Edinburgh, which the legality of Scotland will keep it closed a little bit longer, but we'll hope to open that as soon as possible. Yeah, everything Andrei says is absolutely correct. However, restaurants are romantic, nonsensical, and you have to get caught up in the excitement of being a restaurateur again, ultimately. And so, yeah, we need to do it safely, we need to do it sensibly, we need to do it systematically, but let's get open and trading.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think just the last question, because we are a little bit over, and I do apologize for that. If people have other commitments, thank you for sticking with us. Last question I think would be, is there's quite a lot of questions around just the financial side and dealing with creditors and, you know, and so forth. So as to experts and stalwarts of the industry. It'd be fantastic if you could maybe just share what you're thinking about, maybe some tips or some hints how you would advise people can maybe, work with their creditors to make sure that they can actually put themselves in a good spot to be able to reopen. Because as you both acknowledged, reopening a restaurant is just like opening up a restaurant again. So it'd be great to hear some of your thoughts on that just before we finish.
Andres, I'd love to just talking to your key suppliers. Like for me, choose your key suppliers. You'll know who your friends and who your foes are by the end of this process. One of the great things about this is your suppliers who are your partners basically either rise up or abandon you at a time of need. The ones which rose up and supported you in the last 3 months, keep talking to them and you'll find a way to activate and reactivate their supply chain to your business. Keep talking to the important ones and abandon the ones which have let you down, find new ones.
Great advice. And Andrei, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. It's all about communication. I would say review, reduce, and keep reminding those suppliers that you're in the game and you want to work with them. But I think, in essence, it's all about communication. And I think, to be honest with you, suppliers will probably require shorter terms. I think there might well be less suppliers around. There'll be higher demand. And all of a sudden, you'll be in a position whereby what you thought was acceptable before might not be now. So better have those conversations today, because it will happen that you suddenly realize that certain suppliers that you like to work with are now requiring half as much time in terms in regards to credit, etc. So the more communication you have, I think, the better.
Fantastic. And I've got one last question for each of you before we wrap up. And Andrei, as I'm with you, I'd like to put it to you. What is the, and again, I know we could probably continue to talk for hours about this, but what's the main thing that stood out for you that you've learned from this situation that you're going to take forwards, into the future with you?
I need more money in my reserves. I need a stronger balance sheet. I don't know. I think we probably all have to consider probably having a bit more money under the mattress. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about that. But I think, yeah, I'll leave it on that. More money under the mattress.
Martin, and you've had about 15 seconds to think about this. Sorry for putting you guys on the spot, but what's the thing that you're going to take forward with you that you've learned from this process?
Communication is key, whether that's with your team, whether it's with your guests or the entire company. You can't communicate too much. It's impossible to do at this time. So the more communication, the better.
Fantastic. All right, well, I think that brings to a close. I'm a little bit over. I do apologize, but I hope for everyone listening like me, you found this fantastic. I can't thank enough Martin and Andrei for giving us their time this morning, especially with the announcement yesterday. It's all hands on deck, just like it has been, no doubt, for the last few months as well. So thank you very much. Any of the questions we didn't get around to or anything that's related to OpenTable specifically, we will follow up with you. So thank you very much for your time. Have a great day. The very, very best of luck with the reopening to everyone on the call. And if there is anything that we can do from an OpenTable perspective, please do reach out. But best of luck, and we hope to be in one of your restaurants having a meal and a celebration sometime soon. So thank you and have a great day. Goodbye.